a war hero, a calm smile, the nuclear age. Did Eisenhower just keep things steady or just quietly rewire America? Let's find out. I'm Matt Hasquin. I'm a high school history teacher, and one by one, I'm taking you through each line and each topic of Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire," just to have a cool history theme. So, let's talk about Eisenhower. In 1952, well, Korea, the war drags on, McCarthyism is loud, TV politics are new. Dwight Eisenhower, a five-star general and D-Day commander, runs as a moderate Republican who promises, "I shall go to Korea." Voters want stability, and they get 8 years of it. The big wins out of the Eisenhower administration, the stuff that you feel every day, stuff like the Interstate Highway Act in 1956. We end up with 41,000 miles of road that changed the way that we commute, changes trucking, vacations. The Sputnik shock that took place, NASA in 1958 and the NDEA in 1958 as well. The Soviets launch a satellite in 57, and Ike creates NASA and pours money into math and science classrooms. The Civil Rights Signal, after Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, Eisenhower sends the 101st Airborne to Little Rock in order to force integration. This is federal muscle, and it's all on camera. And there's Eisenhower's health scare when he was in office. He was still a steady hand, but a 1955 heart attack put the presidency under a microscope. The machine kept running. Delegation took place, planning was in place, and that superseded the drama. When it comes to the Cold War aspect of Ike's presidency, you have the Korean armistice that takes place in 53. The shooting ends, but the division remains. We end up with this new look strategy, fewer conventional forces, bigger emphasis on nukes and alliances, deterrence on the cheap. But there's a high stake risk as a result. We see an uptick in covert action. The CIA begins toppling governments in Iran in 1953, Guatemala in 1954. And these are short-term wins, but man, there's long-term blowback as a result. Then we see the Suez Crisis in 1956. Britain, France, Israel, they move on Egypt. Ike says no, pressures them to withdraw, and he tries to assert American leadership without a war. Then there's the U-2 incident in 1960, where we see a U.S. spy plane downed over the Soviet Union. As a result, a summit collapses, and proof that even steady strategies can blow up publicly. And you look at Eisenhower, and his presidency is almost one of like the hidden hand, right? So Eisenhower looks like he's hands off, but behind the scenes he schedules, he nudges, and he lets others take the spotlight. He prefers to go with strategy over sound bites, and historians later call that hidden hand leadership. But when we look at Eisenhower, we need to offer some type of critique and look at the costs, right? So you see the civil rights pace. He enforced law but rarely preached it. You could argue that he could have used a bully pulpit to achieve more. Then there's Operation Wetback in 1954, mass deportations with civil liberties abuses. It's widely condemned for then, but it seems to be embraced now. Then there's the nuclear gamble, the banking on massive retaliation, and that kept budgets lower, but it raised the stakes of every crisis that took place. When it comes time for Eisenhower to leave office after his second term, his farewell from office is one that echoes through the decades after. So on January 17th of 61, Eisenhower warns against the military-industrial complex. Here we have a general telling America to be wary of permanent arms industries and undue influence. That line still shapes debates about spending and lobbying and war. So why does it matter? Well, Eisenhower proves that quiet competence can be transformative. You know, we end up with highways and school funding for STEM and enforcing court orders like at Little Rock, you know, and then just a steadier Cold War posture. He didn't shout, he steered, and he left a map for how to govern in a dangerous decade. Now, when Billy Joel sings Eisenhower in the start of that new verse, he's signaling the 1950s pivot. We've moved out of the 40s and we have a war hero who's managing peace, technology that's racing upward, and a society that's straining to keep up. So, hope you learned something new today. You know, feel free to leave like your town's best or worst interstate story or your favorite line from Ike's farewell address. You know, stick around because the next one that's up in this song, "We Didn't Start the Fire," is "Vaccine," where I'll be talking about the Salk polio breakthrough. Thanks for taking the time to watch.